This is the Politics of Everything, and I'm your host, Amber Daines. Welcome to the podcast where we want to discuss the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment to equality, and much more. Our guests are experts in their field or topic of choice, even if you've not yet heard their name. This is a bipartisan podcast, so while we love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate, by no means is this a one-sided forum for any one political view. So please listen up and enjoy the politics of everything. They say that people fear public speaking more than almost anything, including dying. For episode 24, I'm sharing the microphone with Lucy Perry, who among her many charms is a professional speaker who gets paid to take the stage at business events all over the globe. Lucy is an award-winning leader, consultant and author who's become known for her bright pink hair and ability to shock and inspire in equal doses. She uses her talents for writing and speaking about leadership, communication, changing the world and creative thinking. I've seen her in action, so I'm especially pumped to chat to her today about the politics of speaking. Welcome, Lucy.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's step back in time. Where did your early career begin?
My career as a speaker began in about 2004 when I wrote the world's first childbirth education program for men, and it's run in pubs all over Australia. And that forced me to really hone my presentation skills. It was a 2-hour course, and I had a bunch of men in the room who didn't really want to be there, and I had to create content that appealed to them and deliver it at a pace that was nice and fast, full of stories and lots of fun. So I did that for 6 years, every month for 6 years, and then I was training other presenters all over Australia. So that's where it began, and that was a tough audience to hone my skills.
I mean, did you actually hear crickets? Were people like not talking, and so it was you for 2 hours?
It was me for 2 hours. We used to break in the middle and have dinner, and they'd have another beer, and then they'd loosen up a bit, and then there was more interaction in the second hour. But some of these men would show up, 80% were booked in by their partner, and some of them would show up not even knowing what they were there for that night. So they weren't such a willing audience. As a professional keynote speaker, usually my audience is pretty keen to be there, so it's a much easier gig. But after running that for years, I then sold that business and I became the CEO of a major charity. And when you have that little title CEO and you represent something pretty unusual, I was getting invitations to speak. And that's when my paid speaking career really took off. The most I've ever been paid in that when I was in a CEO role was $50,000 for one keynote speech. And all those fees went to the charity. So it was...
Wow. I guess they're expecting a lot for 50 Gs.
Yes, they are, but they're also getting lots of warm fuzzies that their speakers' fees was going to fund obstetric work in Ethiopia.
Oh, perfect. So I guess for you, I mean, it sounds like you did a lot of the hard yards yourself, but can someone actually learn to speak well publicly? And did you get any coaching at any stage of your career?
I didn't get any coaching at all. I think that some people can get some training to fast track the process, but I did it by trial and error. And I honestly believe that people speak well if they are on stage and speaking just like it's a conversation. If they stand on stage and they are reciting, or they stand on stage and they are presenting, your voice moves in really different waves. And if you just speak in conversation, your voice moves in a much more listenable way. Audiences find you more authentic if you just speak in a conversational way. And the fastest way to murder an audience is by reading to them. So I always say to people, don't read, just be you. Don't try to recite every word. Just have a conversation with your audience. And I always say it's the best type of conversation. I'm a mother of 3 and I get on stage and nobody interrupts me. I get 40 minutes to have a really fabulous conversation with 300 or 500 people without interruption. It's an absolute gift. So as far as learning how to speak, I suggest people do it by trial and error and they just be themselves. Then there are some other little techniques I've learned about how to structure my speeches, how to actually pull together good content, but that's different to the actual learning how to deliver. I just say be yourself and trial and error.
That's fascinating. So you shared with us, I guess, your first significant speaking event, being paid a lot of money that went back into the charity. I guess, what was the content of that and how did you go about pulling that together? Like, what was the process for you? You mentioned, of course, that you want to have a conversation once you're on stage, but before that, there's a whole bunch of prep that happens. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, that's right. I take a brief from the client or the event coordinator. I take a brief on what their themes are, what they'd like me to speak on. So most of my speeches I start from scratch. So I go through this process every time. And then I need to know who's in that audience and what the outcome is that they want after that 1 hour. What do they want to hear? Do they just want to hear rollicking stories, or do they need... has there got to be some learning wrapped around this? And once I understand who's in that audience, so it might be 500 mortgage brokers, and they might want some general business takeaways of how to run their business, how to look at it in different ways. So I'm not there to teach them about finance. I'm there to teach them different ways to look at the way they're working. I get really different briefs all the time. So once I have that brief, then I've worked out that I speak in 3-minute blocks. I think it's because I have a short attention span and I bore easy, and I've pretty much done a point in 3 minutes. But it's also your audience's attention span. You know, most songs are 3 or 3.5 minutes long, so it's a nice little chunk of time to make a point and tell a story. So if I've been given 40 minutes to speak, I've got about a 1 or 2 minute intro and a 1 or 2 minute outro, and everything in between is cut into 3-minute sections, and I make a point, tell a story, make a point, tell a story. So it's that simple as far as structuring my speech. Back when I was speaking on behalf of a major charity, I had some really fascinating stories to tell, and I had to balance between the horrors of the work that's being done and the lighthearted side, because you can't just drag an audience through the horrors. That's not entertaining. I think the emotional roller coaster is essential. So if you're going to make people cry in your audience, you really better make them laugh as well. So I structured my speeches so that the entertaining, the funnies, the laughs are nice and evenly spread through a speech. Never ever end on a sad note. Always end on your best, most fabulous, hilarious, rollicking story. And then I always just recap. So I might have taught them in 40 minutes. I may have only focused on 6 or 7 major points, but I really recap them just in one word, bang, 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 right at the end. So that's how I structure my speeches. Now that I've been doing it for so many years, I limit myself to the time I'm on an aeroplane on the way to give that speech, to actually structure the speech. Otherwise, it would just be, I'd let it become a huge job. So I do it quickly. I know my content really well so that I can speak from one piece of paper with just a few keywords on it. So that's how I work. That's what works for me.
Wow, that's incredible. So there's definitely a bit of a process, even for someone like yourself who's sounds like you've had to just think on your feet a lot of the time and just pull it together. Do you know how many keynotes you would have done over the years? And you mentioned that you do them all from scratch, but do you have a few that you kind of can repackage for your audience?
Yeah, I do. I think I've probably done, I had to think about this, maybe 300 speeches, maybe more. And I do have some old favourites I can always go back to, but I also have some really fabulous stories that illustrate great points. And so I can, like you said, like repackage a series of stories, a series of points, but pull that together under a theme that suits the event I'm speaking at. So I might be given transformation as a theme, and lots of really great juicy stuff can come in under transformation, but it needs some new work on that theme, and then some really great tried and true stories and points that I know really well and I know the audience loves that I can pull together. So I'm not completely going from scratch every time. I've also noticed in myself, I practice my stories just in conversation. And if a story or an illustration of something goes over really well in several conversations, I think, well, that'll go well in a speech then. And that's how I...
Yeah, that's great. So it's a bit of a litmus test, I guess. You can sort of try it on your family and friends before you have the 500 people staring at you blankly.
That's right. And I never try new content on 500 people looking at me. I've always tried it on the people around me. But I've also learnt that the people who really love me find me really funny, and they laugh at everything I say. And so I've had to try build a bigger network of people to sort of test things on, because, you know, people who adore me think I'm the funniest person they know, and that's not a very good test.
No, definitely not. Indeed. How candid of you to share that. I suppose, you know, for you, speaking has obviously been part of your career, but it's also perhaps helped raise your profile. So I guess, how did speaking really become a career for you? I mean, a lot of people do a few speeches here and there, but they certainly don't make a living out of it.
Yes, I finished up my last CEO role, and had done a lot of speaking when I was working with that charity, which was a Cambodian charity. And I just thought about what I really wanted to do next. And I love the speaking. I think I might be addicted to dopamine, and I love the buzz
Aren't we all?
I love the buzz. It's actually the buzz afterwards. I have a really good time on stage. I'm actually a bit revolting to be around for about half an hour before I speak. I love being on stage once I get into the groove, and the buzz afterwards lasts for hours. And being on the speakers trail, I meet the most amazing people, the other speakers, the people in the audience, the people I work with. And so I decided that I would focus on speaking, and I haven't looked back. I've absolutely loved it. It comes with travel, and after travelling in places like Cambodia and Ethiopia, I will never say no to a 5-star hotel. So that's a really nice. Yeah, and then sometimes you're taken to fabulous places like Fiji, and you're just forced to stay another night. So it's
terrible.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It challenges me. You cannot take these gigs for granted. You cannot show up at a speaking engagement unprepared. I might sound like I wing it on stage, but I'm actually well prepared. And I just love the buzz, and especially the people I've met. I've made really great friends who've been in an audience. They've come up afterwards and said hello, and we've connected, and we've wound up being great friends. So it's a pretty cool way to make a living, and I love it.
Excellent. So you found your calling, it sounds like. So what do you enjoy most about public speaking, and how can we all learn to love the process a bit more? As I just said in my intro, a lot of people fear it more than even dying. The idea of everyone looking at them, the fact that they might stumble on words. I mean, how do we actually learn to enjoy it if we're kind of newbies to the speaking gig?
Yeah, two things. You have to know your content really well. So nothing is more frightening than going up in front of an audience to present something you don't know off by heart. So if you're having to refer to notes or read chunks of it, and when you're nervous, your eye doesn't flow down a page in a nice, neat way, your eye will jump around the page, you'll lose your place. It is too horrifying for words to present something you don't know well. So that's number one, is know your content off by heart. Practice it on the dog. Practice it I actually find practicing in the mirror impossible. I can't do it. Never on stage can I see myself. I can hear myself, but I don't have to look at myself. So I say just practice it over and over until all you need are one-word triggers to send you into the next section of your speech. So once you know it well, you'll be much more confident going up there. And the second thing I always say to people who are nervous about speaking is remember, when you go on stage, the audience loves you already. And that's because the audience does not want you to face plant, because it is the most awkward thing for everyone to go through. The audience wants you to succeed. They're already behind you. They love you already. So I tell myself that before I go on. Before I walk on a big stage with a big audience, my heart is pounding so loud I can't even hear them introducing me. And I just figure they've said something that is great. And I'm standing there just telling myself, the audience loves me already. I've just got to deliver what I know really well and do it authentically and in a style that lets me correct myself. You know, if you screw something up and it's a very conversational way of presenting, you can always backpedal and go, I forgot to tell you the most important thing back there. And you can just wind back, tell that bit, connect through and keep going on, and it won't derail you. So those are the things I recommend to people who are afraid of speaking.
No, it sounds fantastic advice and so practical, and I can actually picture you going through that process, those mantras before you get on stage. And, there's people like Amy Cuddy who've become well known for the power pose, that, if you go into this pose before you go onto stage or do something really scary, you can actually change your mindset because you've changed the way your physiology is as well. So I think those sorts of things can really help.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, one more thing. I've noticed that I need to focus on my breathing, and I have to consciously tell myself to breathe into my stomach. And this is just before I go on stage. Once I'm on stage, I don't think about my breathing. But before I go on, I need to breathe into my stomach and take some really deep breaths. Otherwise, I've noticed I can go on stage and do shallow breathing and I sound a little out of breath. So I've had to do that to take control of my breath and pace myself.
That's really important. Breathing is great, and also relaxes you and calms you, I guess, as well. There's probably some sort of, physiology around why the breathing becomes key, I guess, to calm our nervous system and stop those little voices in our head going, I can't do this, or I'm going to stuff up. So, yes, I think breath work is really, really key for many things. So when you go to prepare, you hope it all goes well. But there are technical things that can happen or last minute changes. So do you have any examples of when that's happened to you and how you've dealt with it? It could be the change the order, a speaker hasn't shown up, you're suddenly the first speaker or whatever it might be. How do you deal with that?
I've had so many horror stories. I've had every possible thing go wrong in events that, I've showed up and exactly the kind of thing you describe, or the audio doesn't work, or there's that we're not going to use the slides that were meant to go with my speech because there's technical issues or whatever, and you just have to roll with it. So I don't expect any particular type of AV. If I show up and they give me a handheld mic, great. If I show up and I have to yell, I'll survive. If it's a lapel mic, I just roll with whatever they can do on the day. And I've learned to just get good at whatever type of AV is there. And you just have to roll with it because you can't fix some of these problems. And I've actually learned I no longer present with slideshows anymore.
I was going to say that's one thing when I've seen you present, Lucy, I admire the fact you can not have even a visual really behind you. It's just you.
Yeah, I used to feel obliged to do that because conferences would ask for your slide deck. So I used to think, okay, I better whack a slide deck together. But I realised that giving a slide deck, they usually want it 3 weeks before the event, and that forces me to have my preparation done far too soon, and it means I can't respond to things that might have happened in that 3 weeks, and it means that when I'm on stage I can't respond to the audience and explore something more because the audience is loving it. I'm having to go in a linear direction that's governed by a slideshow. So I dumped that a while ago, maybe 2 years ago. I stopped using slideshows, and it always makes event organisers happy. It's one less technical thing to get right. And then it means the focus is on me. I have to be a really good speaker and very entertaining to hold an audience's full attention with no video, no graphics, no words, keywords to keep them on track. But I think it makes my job easier as far as my preparation goes.
Yeah, it's much far more. I guess it's just you really. I mean, so in some ways people might go, oh, my slides are my crutch, but I know that one of my clients owns a major presentation studio, and she's a leader in what she does. And she just says, like, people should only have 5 slides for a 40-minute presentation because they can't be the crutch.
Yeah, that's right.
They have to be amazing if you're going to use them. And if they're not amazing, you need to chuck a few out. They've got to be visual. They've got to be not reflecting what you're saying at the same time, because then people aren't looking at you, they're looking at the slides.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I think one of the common mistakes or things that I have to roll with on the day is I show up and things have run well over time. And so I've had a brief to give a 60-minute presentation, and they've said, we're really sorry, you're going to have to cut it to 40. So I have to do that on the fly, and I know which stories or sections of mine I can tell in a tighter way, or I'm told, far out, you can go for a whole hour, but we only briefed you for 40 minutes. And I think, fab, there's sections that I can speak on that I can just tell in more detail. There's a great story. If I need a 5-minute filler, there's this fabulous story I know I can tell in exactly 5 minutes. So I just have to be super flexible and roll on the day. A slideshow would never let me do that. The other cracker I remember, it was at Parliament House in New South Wales, and I showed up, and it was back when I was using a slideshow, and I couldn't see the slideshow from where I stood. The audience could see the screen, but I couldn't. And there was no clicker for me to use on stage. So there was a person standing in the wing, and I had to give them like a big obvious wink when it was time to progress the slide. And I just had to hope that the next slide was the one I was expecting. And I just made a joke of it. And I said, there's been serious budget cuts here at Parliament House, and they can't afford a clicker. So I'd like to introduce to you my human clicker, and I dragged this poor guy on stage. And so I'll be giving him big obvious winks to progress the slide, and the audience just found it fun, and it meant they understood what was going on for me, and it was fine. So, I mean, maybe sometimes when there's total cock-ups, it's something you can highlight and make fun of, and everyone rolls with it. As long as your style is casual, it kind of gives you permission to do that.
Yeah, totally. That's funny. So I guess, can you share with us your favourite stage moment or crowd pleasing story that works every time? So can we hear a bit of Lucy Perry in action? Obviously, we can't see you in your fabulous pink hair, but we can definitely hear you.
I usually start with with quite a pace. Nothing is more boring than a speaker coming on and just waffling, or, thank you so much for having me, and what a snore. And when you are speaking, every single person in that audience has a highly powered entertainment device in their hand. They can flick over to their phone the second you bore them. And I have a short attention span, and I'm the worst for that. I'll sit in an audience, and if they come on and they start really slow and boring and do the mandatory thank yous, I'm already checking my emails and flicking through on my phone. So I start really punchy. I dive on stage. And I usually try to develop some kind of camaraderie with my audience. So if it's a bunch of people who've come together and they've got a day off work to do this big workshopy day, or to go onto this conference, I say, how cool is this? We get to wag work together. And that usually just gives some kind of camaraderie with your audience. They have a laugh because it's meant to be work, but we're actually having a really good time. Then I'm really conscious of their time, and I say, I have you for the next, and it might be 60 minutes, 40 minutes. I have you for the next 40 minutes, and you are never going to get that back. So I'm not going to waste your time. We're going to crack on right away. And I think audiences appreciate that I appreciate their time. Nothing is worse than sitting in an audience and you get a very clear picture that that speaker is not valuing your time. So I start nice and pacey like that. And if there are thank yous to do, I always do them at the start of my speech, because I guarantee you I'll forget them at the end. So if there's people to thank, I do that, but super fast, and try and keep it quite light-hearted. So that's how
Not the Academy Awards where they go on and on and on. They have to like that on you or pull the music.
No, if there's someone to thank, usually I'll say, thank you, Amber, for choosing me to speak today. Sight unseen, that was a very brave thing to do, or something like that, just to sort of joke that they may not have heard me speak. But so I start nice and fast and fun. I have a few stories that work really well and are always a crowd pleaser. And I find the more incredible a story, yet it's something people can relate to, the more successful it is. And I've done lots of reading.
Is there a little example you can play with for us?
Well, there's one that takes
a couple of
Yeah, let me do a short version. Well, there's one.
See how good you are on the fly, Lucy.
Okay, so this is a quite well-known story now because it is 11 years old. So in various places I've been able to make this story applicable to my audience. Sometimes it's just in the interest of fun. I'm going to end this speech on, so I might have done a whole section on how to bring fun into your work and why fun is crucial for staff retention and that sort of stuff. So I've done a whole section on fun. And then in the interest of fun, I'm going to leave you with this cracking story. And it's my story, and it's the birth of my second child. So she was born at Christmas time, and she was early. And we always had this huge family Christmas party, so most people can relate to Christmas parties and the birth of babies, and audiences love this one. But I went into labour as the first guests started arriving at that party. And I thought, I've got 24 hours to have this baby, because my last baby took 24 hours from start to finish. And I thought, I've got $200 worth of sausages on the barbecue. I've got to get this thing going. So my head was not in my uterus, and I was ignoring the very clear signs that I was going into full-on roaring labour. Within about half an hour, I couldn't speak through contractions, and I had to just opt out of the party. I got my husband's attention. I ran up the hall, and I remember the last thing I did before I opted out of that party for good was I cranked up the stereo, because I'm a very loud birther. And last time I screamed that hospital down. And so I cranked up the stereo so I could holler as loud as I wanted to. And I still remember the song was My Sharona, which is a pretty cool birth song. So then I ran into my ensuite bathroom, and honestly, 2 contractions later, her head popped out. And as her head popped out, my husband was standing in the bathroom door with a beer in his hand, none the wiser, no idea I was in labour. And he says to me, "What do I do?" And I said, "Put the beer down, because on the next push you are catching this baby." And he did exactly as he was told.
Multitask right now.
Put the beer down, and she came rocketing out, and he caught her, and then I eventually the midwife showed up. She did the business end of the deal, and then I had a shower, got dressed, wrapped up my baby, and went out into the party and had champagne. So it was a pretty.
That is an awesome story.
Pretty unusual story. And I told that a couple of years ago, and there were 3 people in the audience who were there at that party when Harlow was born. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, that was.
So they can verify it's a true story, not making this stuff up.
They could. Yeah, lots of fun.
Cool. So as we head towards the end of the interview, do you have any mentors or inspirational figures that have kind of powered you through in your career or in your life? And what have they taught you?
In my life, I've had a lot of different people who've inspired me, but in the speaking career side of things, unusually, it's a guy called Bernard Salt. And he sort of took me under his wing about 2 years ago. We went on a national roadshow together and spoke in 6 locations, and he spoke on demographics, and I was speaking on social media, actually. And he was so fantastic. He gave me so much advice about how to run your speaker business, how to look after yourself on the trail. I remember asking him, I noticed, Bernard, that you don't drink at all. And he said, when I started on the speakers trail, my body couldn't cope with doing breakfast gigs on a plane, a dinner gig, and drinking, and getting up the next morning, catching a plane, doing the next gig. And he said, I gave up alcohol for good. And so I've never, ever drunk on the job after learning that from Bernard. And also seeing...
Yeah, he's amazing. He's actually was one of our early podcast interviews too, and I've seen him present, and he's a master at what he does.
He's fantastic. He's the master of... I've learnt from him about owning the stage. Don't hide behind a lectern. Own the stage, where to stand. He's nice and pacey. He's really funny, but you learn a lot when you hear Bernard speak. I've never been bored when I hear him speak, and I've heard him give the same speech, 6 times on that particular trip, and it didn't bore me at all. So I've learnt a lot from him, and he's a really generous, good guy.
Excellent. So if we want to finish up now, the last bit of advice I'd love to hear from you. Anyone who wants to get better at public speaking, do you have any top 1 or 2 tips? What would they be and why?
I would say start out by practicing, doing free gigs. So there are hundreds of Rotary clubs all over Australia, and they need a speaker every week at every single one of those clubs. So do 50 Rotary clubs with a cracker speech until you've got that honed. And Rotary is a tough audience. To make them laugh you've really got to work hard. So start by practicing, and then get some really good video. Once you have video, your videos sell your speaking work. So I only have 2 really good videos at the moment, and they trigger so much work for me. It's fantastic, and I only got those in the last 3 years. So start by doing free gigs in places like Rotary clubs, and get some good video, and then go.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure to chat to you today. I've learnt so much, and as a speaker, I'm always looking for new tips myself. So if you want to connect further with Lucy, we'll have her details on our show notes. You've been listening to The Politics of Everything. I'm Amber Daines. Until next time, be well. Thanks for listening today. If you've enjoyed The Politics of Everything, we thrive on feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network, your friends and family. I'm also always on the hunt for fabulous new guests, so if you've got a view to share and an idea how to get our listeners excited, please email me at amber@bespokecomms, that's BESPOKECOMMS.com.au, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Until next time.